This is Unearthing Eden, a podcast hosted by two witches where we will be talking about all things metaphysical and witchy. Welcome to our garden. So, this week's episode is going to be all about Dionysus. And for me to tell you about Dionysus, I would have to get into the birth of Zagreus. Zagreus is known as an underworld deity. Zagreus has multiple backstories that we could get into. So, some scholars say that his parents were Zeus and Persephone, and some say that it was Hades and Persephone. But the one that we're going to go with and I'm going to tell you about is Zeus and Persephone, mainly because it does tie into Dionysus' origin. So Zeus disguised himself as a snake and mated with Persephone. Take that how you will. If you know Greek mythology, you already kind of know what we're getting into with him. But he basically impregnates Persephone, who then gave birth to Zagreus, and he was raised in secrecy, but as we all know, Hera found out and she was very unhappy about it. And she does have a tendency to go after the children of Zeus's infidelity. So Zeus really thought highly of Zagreus. He ended up gifting Zagreus one of his lightning bolts and went on to say that he was going to be the heir to the throne of Olympus. And that angered her even more because she was really rooting for Ares to inherit the throne. So what Hera did when she ended up finding out where Zagreus was and being hidden, which she usually always does, she took away the lightning bolt that Zeus gifted him and distracted him with toys, which then she got some of the Titans to, trigger warning, they ripped him apart and cannibalized him, which is very symbolic later on in his story. But his heart was saved by Athena, who made it into a potion and gave it to Zeus. Zeus found one of his human consorts. And mind you, this one was consensual. Simile or Simali, I'm sorry if I pronounced her name wrong. I'm going to call her Simile. She willingly drank this potion in this version of the story. She knew that she was sleeping with Zeus and it was consensual for her. They were considered to be in love or in some sort of love. And she became pregnant with what soon will be Dionysus. Hera found out that Simile was pregnant and disguised herself as an old woman and went to her and basically sowed doubt into her mind that she was really with Zeus because the gods weren't able to show humans their true form because it can be very damaging. It's like being near a supernova was kind of how it was described. So she basically convinces Simile to make Zeus show his true form and prove himself. So the next time Zeus comes to visit Simile, she asks him to make a promise to her, and he does. And she says, well, you have to show me your true form. He does warn her, but she insists, and he unfortunately ends up disintegrating her. But he was able to save the womb with the child in it. He took this and he sewed it into his thigh and later on gave birth, and then out came Dionysus. And Dionysus was in danger at this point as well because Hera always finds out in every single piece of lore that we find, she always finds out. Inu and Athamas was said to have taken him in and cared for him as a child. They raised him as a girl to disguise him from Hera, who did find him later on again. She cursed them with madness, including Dionysus. But Inu and Athamas ended up killing their family and they threw themselves into the sea, killing themselves. But in some legends, they were turned into sea deities after that. Dionysus ended up escaping. It was later cured by the Titan Rhea, his grandmother. She's also known as the Mother of Gods. And then after she cured his madness, she was the one who taught him the sacred rites that would later be associated with him. The drinking, wildness, dancing, music, and divine possession. And after he regained his sanity, he was able to continue his travels, and he was spreading the knowledge of how to make wine, growing his cult. He was establishing cities, and I mean, it was all over the place. This wasn't just in Greece, like he was going everywhere. So there's some lore associated with him, something called the cult, or the wine cult, or the cult of Dionysus. They're kind of interchangeable, but they were originally known as a wine cult. This was pre-Hellenistic times, and this honestly could have originated around the time that wine was created, which was like around 6000 BC. And they also think that it began in the Zagros Mountains, which is interesting because it kind of goes back to Zagreus, the deity that we talked about earlier. So there's like older versions of him. The Orphic Dionysus is the older version. He was very heavily associated with death and rebirth due to his whole thing with being relentlessly hunted down by Hera and then constantly having to find new means to be born.
I got a question. Why do they refer to the followers of Dionysus as a cult? Is that normal for the Greek gods, or is that specific to just him?
Well, there was multiple cults. It's mainly because it's so secretive.
Okay.
And there's not really much intel. And I don't want to say it was close knit because it was, mind you, the wine cult, it was pretty open to join, but it was taboo in a way. They went against a lot of like what society would deem as normal, which is literally Dionysus. He encourages you to look within yourself and to figure out what you want and how you feel and to express yourself the way that you need to. But mind you, Dionysus is a lot older than the Greek religion as a whole. He has heavy associations with death and rebirth, which the wine cult that I was talking about was very heavily influenced by this thought. They were very into the idea of death and rebirth and continuing that cycle. He's also associated with divine madness and ecstasy due to the fact he was driven mad by Hera, and he kind of embodied that after it. Not to say that he was going around just being wild, which I mean, he kind of was, but there's a stigma behind saying that he's the god of madness. We think of it in a negative light, but he's more expressive in my experience than anything. He is known as a wild god, so he's very connected with the wilderness and animalistic behavior. It's very primal, not madness in the sense where media will show you madness. It's madness in the sense of this is not normal for our society and civilization. This person is out in the woods dancing around a fire, and madness in the sense of rage. He would go into rages sometimes. Known to have mood swings, but only really when provoked. So somehow this wine cult started in the mountains in Zagreus, they think. Somehow it ended up in Mycenaean Greece. And it kind of transformed a little bit. That's when they started using the name Dionysus, and they ended up being drunk, specifically on wine. There wasn't really a lot of other things going around. Wine was very common. They saw intoxication as being possessed by the god himself. Like when you're drunk, you are possessed by Dionysus. So the creation of wine itself is a symbolism of Dionysus. So death and rebirth, the grapes are taken, they're squished, they're fermented, and it creates wine. So it's a transformation of one thing into another. This cult did attract a lot of lower class or outcasted people, women, a lot of them. They didn't have a lot of rights, and there was a very classist system going on at the time, and I mean, seems like it's going on everywhere. But some of the women were actually called maenads, which were wild women. They were devotees of Dionysus. Satyrs were also seen around him, which are half man, half goat creatures. So I'm going to share some stories of Dionysus briefly. He was abducted by pirates, and they were trying to tie him up, and the ropes wouldn't tie. Like they couldn't get them to tie around him. And he ended up overtaking the ship with ivy and turned them all into dolphins. And then they
Wait.
jumped into the ocean.
Like, so the pirate
Yeah.
couldn't tie rope. Dionysus said, "I'm tired of this. Trees, dolphin."
No, because they kind of deserved it, all right?
No, they did. No, they did. But that's so iconic of him.
So here's something really interesting too about Dionysus is he is one of the major 12 gods of Olympia, sometimes traded spaces with Hesta or Hestia, but he is still seen as the successor to the throne in a lot of cases. Some will say Ares, but there's a lot of evidence where Zeus respects Dionysus a lot. A lot of the gods do respect Dionysus. Even though he's a demigod, he still has his place as one of the 12 gods of Olympia. It's not really notated in stories, so it's kind of transitional. So Hestia could be in it, but some people use the version with Dionysus in it. But there were some tales of Hestia giving up her seat to Dionysus. Another interesting story with him is he is the one who gave King Midas his golden touch. So King Midas asked Dionysus he wants to turn everything to gold. He wants more money. Dionysus humored him and gave him this. And mind you, this wasn't a curse. This wasn't supposed to be something bad. But if you know the story of Midas, you know that he just kept turning everything to gold. He couldn't eat. He couldn't drink water. And his daughter ended up hugging him and she ended up turning to gold. He found Dionysus and basically begged him, can you take this away from me? Dionysus was like, yeah, sure, dude. And then took him to this river. And I can't remember the name of the river. And he was like, you bathe in this and you'll be fine. And so he did. And his daughter came back to life. And then they lived a simple life in the woods.
Wait. Hold on, I have two statements. My first statement is going to be, whenever I think about the 12 gods of Olympus, Dionysus is one of the 12. I will say
Yeah.
that. I feel like that's something I've known for like my entire life. But also, so King Midas
Mm-hmm.
is now Woodsman Midas.
I suppose. It's a story of how greed can be bad, and like you can't always, or if you get what you want, it could come with consequences. So, but mind you, Dionysus did not mean for this to be a punishment for him. He literally just granted this guy's wish.
He really
And
did this for funsies. He said, I want to see what happens.
and yeah, and he was like, you know what? Let me get you to the river because this is crazy.
He's like,
So
oh, you know what? I feel bad now. I'm sorry.
no, he was just like, okay, bet, like we'll get this taken care of, lickety split, and then it was fine.
Lickety
It's
split, you're.
it's the duality that sends me with Dionysus. I love this deity so very dearly.
I feel like
Another story that I want to share pretty briefly, but this is the one that I've told you already before we started recording this. Pentheus, the king of Thebes. Dionysus basically made it to Thebes, and he's already been there, mind you. He's been traveling everywhere, but he was teaching the people there of who he was, how to work with him, how to practice with him, or worship him. But Pentheus did not like that. He did not see Dionysus as a deity. He didn't believe that he was a deity, even though his spiritual advisors were telling him this guy is a god, like, let him do what he needs to do. He was like, no. So Dionysus ended up driving the women to madness, and they all left. They're in the mountains worshiping Dionysus, practicing his rites, which, if you know anything about Maenads, I'll get more into it later on in this description, but they were wilding out pretty much. He isn't just a party god, but that was one of the biggest ways to honor him and worship him was to dance and celebrate and to have a party, basically. So this farmer goes to the king and he's like, hey, these women are in the woods, like in these mountains, causing a ruckus. Like they are partying, they are doing these strange rituals. I don't understand it. So Dionysus obviously is privy to all of this, disguised himself and goes to the king and says, oh, you should disguise yourself as a woman and you should infiltrate this group and see what they're doing and just to be nosy, I guess, and to go on a power trip. So he does. He dresses like a woman and he goes up into these mountains. And obviously the Maenads know what's up. I mean, as much as they can under the influence of Dionysus. They think he's a wild animal. His mother is also in these mountains worshiping Dionysus. She thinks he's a lion. And another trigger warning, rips his head off with her bare hands because, mind you, he gives these Maenads extraordinary strength. They are said to be able to fight off groups of men with their weapons, and they're able to fight them off with their bare hands. Like these women are in a frenzy. They tear this man to pieces, which is one of the ways that it's symbolic to Dionysus. Like I said, I'll get into that later too. But she thinks she killed a lion, his mother. She parades his head around on a stick on her spear, and she goes to her father and shows him, thinking that, she's a hero, right? She just slayed a lion that was about to attack the town or the kingdom. And he ends up pulling her out of this mad state. And she realizes she killed her son. And I mean, what do you do after that, So that was one of the biggest things with Dionysus. This is one of the stories that really shows his duality as well. So with him gifting and saving King Midas, he's also capable of extreme violence as well as kindness and joy. So they go from partying to a frenzy state of violence. Now, his appearance can vary from an older man with a beard in some of the depictions of him. And then there's another version of him who's a younger person, very feminine qualities, and bearing horns on his head, which could be either a bull or a goat horn. Most of the time it's a bull because that's one of his sacred animals. Now, some of the ways that the ancient Greeks or his cult would honor him was through animal sacrifice. He is very connected to the bull and the leopard, wild animals, basically. They are both capable of violence and kindness. I know a lot of people have this vision of a bull in their head where they're very violent and they're lashing out. Unfortunately, there's pretty horrible things that happen to these animals that kind of give them this stereotype of being aggressive animals, but they are very gentle as well. So that can also be tied into the duality of him. Now, there's something that is very heavily associated with him. It's called omophagia, which is raw eating. That's what it translates to. It is a ritual associated with Dionysus. It does involve the consumption of raw flesh of a sacrificed animal. The Maenads were known to go into these frenzies and would consume raw meat. So the act of sparagmus, which is the act of tearing apart an animal, or as we learned earlier, a human, was another thing that Maenads were said to have done. This is not meaning that they literally ate raw meat. A lot of this is symbolism. It is symbolism connecting us to our more primal states, to a wild animal versus being humanized or being in a civilized society, whereas animals would be in the woods, they would hunt. And that's how these animals would eat. They would, especially predators, they would tear apart animals and eat them. But this is not a literal thing. There's not really any archaeological evidence that they actually did this. It mainly is they sacrificed the animal and symbolically consumed the meat in a different way, but they left some as an offering to Dionysus. And the raw flesh eating part would be more associated with Dionysus himself. And the Maenads or the devotees of Dionysus would participate in other means, whether it be cooking the animal and eating it in celebration, or eating something else entirely, or just consuming alcohol and becoming intoxicated and going into a frenzy where a lot of times it was dancing, it was orgies. He's heavily associated with sex, sexuality, fertility, and like I said, mainly with celebration, just enjoying life and enjoying the time that you have as a human instead of worrying about how you look to the rest of society. So I want to get into his wife. So Dionysus does have a wife. Her name was Ariadne. She was originally abandoned by Theseus on an island of Naxos. It was essentially, he was using her to navigate a labyrinth. It was a whole ordeal. I'm not going to get into her entire story, but he ended up finding Ariadne on the island through one of his ventures. And he was really in awe by her beauty. And he saw that it was really unfair how they abandoned her on this island. They did fall in love and he married her. And in some other versions of the lore, she became a goddess after her death and she joined him in Olympus. So they did have 3 children together, Thoas, Staphylos, and Enopion. And I mean, they pretty much lived happily. There was not really any drama in his marriage. It's very much he loved her, she loved him. They fell in love through these circumstances where she was in a really bad position and he helped her out of that, but it wasn't a you owe me type situation like you hear a lot of these stories. There's a lot of toxic relationships in the Greek pantheon. To be fair, a lot of horrible things happen to women and men in these lores, but they seem to have a pretty solid marriage. And he still kept his cult. He still was able to express himself. She was able to express herself. But that is what I have for his history. There is so much more that goes into Dionysus. I encourage everyone to do their research on him. You might find that you've actually heard of him in a lot of stories that you weren't aware was Dionysus. So I'm going to send it over to you for the astrology and associations.
I will say one thing before I start that, though, is it seems like Dionysus is for the women, and I love that about him as a deity.
He's very much a liberator.
Iconic.
Especially women were attracted to this because some people say that it's modern women, like it was modern women living in ancient Greece. And that's why they called them mad women, because they're like, why aren't you doing what men say? And they were really just out here expressing themselves, dancing in the woods and having like cookouts and stuff.
As they should, because dancing in the woods and having a cookout, they didn't even have music, like speakers back then, so they couldn't have been playing any type of like Fetty Wap, you know? Sorry.
No, but they did have some crazy musical beats back then.
They
I'm
had
not even
nothing
gonna
else
get
they
into
had
that.
nothing else to do besides make them. Anyway, sorry, I just needed to get that off my
You're good.
chest. Okay, so the zodiac sign that is mainly affiliated with Dionysus is going to be a Pisces. The key notes for a Pisces is going to be their empathy, imagination, and their artistic nature. Now, this resonates with Dionysus's influence over ecstasy and altered states of consciousness. A really loud truck just passed, so if you can see if you can block that out. It just made my entire house shake. Anyway, as a Pisces is able to navigate between fantasy and reality, that's going to be why they're so connected to Dionysus, because he helps you get to that point in between and a lot of like altered, as Mickey said, madness. You'll also see an affiliation with a Sagittarius or a Virgo. Sagittarius for the exploration, freedom, and happy energy, and a Virgo for the nature, agriculture, and the harvest. So that's definitely going to depend on how you see Dionysus as a deity and how you want to go about this practice. But at the end of the day, Pisces is going to be the ones that are called in that direction the most. The cool thing about Dionysus that when I was looking into all this wonderful information is he has multiple animal representation. So I'm going to list them off and then I'm going to go through them. So he has the panther slash leopard. They kind of had them as the same animal. They kind of are and aren't the same animal nowadays, but I digress. A tiger, a bull, and a serpent. For the panther, they represent the wild, untamed, and raw primal forces of nature, especially, as Mickey was saying, as the deity of ecstasy and liberation. They can celebrate with wild abandon and reckless abandon. So panthers slash leopards are going to be like the harbinger of that energy and aspect of life. Most of the time, Dionysus will be either riding on a leopard or have some type of leopard pictured on him, whether that be, from what I saw, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mickey, but it's like a cloak, or sometimes it has the head over him and he's got like the arms hung over him, something like along those lines.
He was also known to carry a staff with a pine cone on top of it. Pine cones are very heavily associated. You can make a Dionysus staff in honor of him. And really, you just go get a stick and tie or glue a pine cone to the end of it, and that could be a really good way to honor him on an altar or something.
I love that for him. But yeah, so a lot of panther or leopard skin pictures, idolization, everything along those lines. For tigers, it's going to be the same wild, untamed, and raw primal force of nature, but it also is going to give some transformation. Tigers go through a lot of changes and there are different kinds of tigers, so that's going to help a lot. I didn't look too much into that part because he's also represented by a serpent, and I was gonna kind of mix those two together. But I wanted to mention tigers because the chariot that Dionysus rides in is pulled by two tigers most of the time in most depictions of him. And I think that's really cool because imagine being pulled by two tigers wearing a leopard pelt. I would absolutely die because that sounds like the coolest thing ever.
King energy.
Right. Anyway, the other one is the next animal is bull for its strength and fertility and death and resurrection. So, as Mickey mentioned, they did a lot of sacrificing and eating of the raw meat. So, bulls were a sacrificial animal in almost every single culture, and especially in Greek culture. So, that would be the death and resurrection. By sacrificing said bull, it would cause something good to happen in the future. So that would be the resurrection. And then fertility and strength. Bulls are notoriously strong animals and are able to pull tons and tons of weight. And most bulls, don't have fertility issues. They'll constantly be having calves over and over again for as long as their bodies will let them. And then the last animal is a serpent. Same thing with rebirth. Sacrificed and then something good comes out of it. But this is the one of transformation that I was mentioning with the tiger. So the serpent is able to shed its skin and then grow back new skin, or already has new skin underneath, so that'll be rebirth and renewal. And then another really good symbol of Dionysus is going to be the grapevine, mainly with, again, the rebirth and renewal, because grapes will die in the winter and they will come back in the spring. So we're going to get into our modern day worship of Dionysus. Now, I personally have not worked with any deities yet. Some of the modern day worships that we're going to be going over whenever we talk about a deity is either going to be from personal experience or an amalgamation of information that we found on various websites, blogs, videos, anything along those lines. For Dionysus, is it okay if I say that you gave me the information?
I do practice with Dionysus. He has been one of the deities that I work with heavily for about, 4 years now, 3 or 4 years at this point. I've been working with him for a while, and this information came from how I personally do it. Sarah's going to share it with you, but you do not have to take this as a blueprint. How you work with the deity is going to be different than how somebody else may work with the deity. But just to add that in.
Exactly. At the end of the day, your worship is your worship. If me and Mickey worship Dionysus to get if we both worshipped him, it could be two different ways that we do it. It's up to you as the practitioner. So modern worship is done by consuming wine or alcoholic beverages or other intoxicants, where you can perform dances, theater, you can create art or a set ritual dedicated to honoring Dionysus. Offerings of grapes, wine, ivy plants, sex and fertility, theaters and plays are also a really good way to worship him as a god or a deity. I just almost ripped my headphone out. Dionysus is a primal god and is known to have heavy connections to wild nature and animals, which is why they have the stories of his followers eating raw animals. And then many believe that when done in a ritualistic setting, being intoxicated indicates that you are being possessed by Dionysus and you can gain inner wisdom. Many people believe that when done in a ritualistic setting, being intoxicated indicates that you are being possessed by Dionysus. This can help you gain your inner wisdom and see the wilder side of yourself. Dionysus is a symbol of our connection to the wild and nature. It teaches us that we don't have to conform to the structure society has laid out for us. There does not have to be a plan. There does not have to be any type of immediate action. Life should be fun and blissful, but we also have to recognize the part of yourself. Life should be fun and blissful, but we can also recognize the parts of ourselves that are animalistic. He's also a really good representation of transformation and liberation, as we mentioned. He allows us to fully express ourselves and be true to our nature as a human being. A really interesting symbol for him as well is going to be 3 circles hovering over a line drawing of a cup. So the 3 circles would represent a grape, and the cup would obviously it's a cup, going to represent a cup, but it's going to be a cup of wine or a cup of alcoholic beverage.
And I will add that image in the video so you guys can have a visual representation of it as well. It is one of the first things that pops up when you look up Dionysus symbols.
And his leopard pelt, don't forget that.
Yes, but there's other variations of it, and we'll give you some visual representations in this episode if you're watching on YouTube so that you can have a better idea of what we were looking at.
And please always do your research before you decide to reach out to a deity or start to worship them or bring them into your environment. You don't want to do something that will be disrespectful or harmful to yourself or them.
Exactly. And we're going to get into the tarot and crystal pull after this. So the tarot card that I pulled for this episode was the moon. Symbolizing our intuition, anything with the subconscious mind, dreams, anything in an illusion. It is a very feminine based card, seeing as the sun represents the masculine and the moon represents feminine. That doesn't necessarily mean man and woman. It's just different aspects of the same coin. So the upright meaning can mean that you might need to delve into your subconscious a little bit. Some meditation might help, some deep thinking about how you feel, be very in the moment and present. And really, it's just inner work. It's figuring out how you feel and identifying these emotions. A reversed meaning can mean you might need to overcome some fears or you might be confused about a situation. It could also mean that you need to gain clarity through a situation that you're in or releasing yourself from something. So it also has heavy ties in with psychic abilities and listening to your gut feelings. And if something doesn't feel right, mind that feeling, basically trusting yourself and your own power. But the moon holds very significant symbolism in witchcraft and practicing your spirituality in general. A lot of people go by the moon phases. It could mean you are getting into a new routine with something as well, is how I can see the moon. But that is all I have for the tarot card. If you want to do the crystal.
Heck yeah, I want to do the crystal. So today we're going to talk about labradorite, which is very fitting considering you pulled the moon. So labradorite main properties are going to be that it's a very protective stone. It's a bringer of light. It can help raise your consciousness and connect the universal energies. It also helps remove bad habits and negative feelings or thoughts. Any of the thoughts or feelings that may end up holding you back. And it also will help you filter in some enjoyment and motivation. With that happening, it can banish your fear, insecurities, and psychic debris from past disappointments from current or past lives. It's a very calming stone, so it helps for an overactive mind. It helps you analyze and rationalize your thoughts and bring a lot of clarity. And it also can help you, it also supports the changes that you make and keeps you strong and steadfast in those changes. And then tying it into the moon, which is really interesting, it's a strengthening stone for intuition and creativity. It helps to balance and protect your aura. And it can also help unblock any type of creative blocks. So labradorite is composed of calcium, sodium, aluminum, and silicone. And if you add some mica into it, that's how you get that iridescent look to it. So it's like a dark, I don't want to say it's like a blackish, bluish, greenish hue, but it's got some interesting color combinations depending on how much mineral is in each stone, because not every single stone is going to have the same amount of minerals, which is why not all stones look the same. It is mainly found in Italy, Greenland, Russia, Canada, Scandinavia, Madagascar, and Brazil in the mines. So never forget, everything's always in a mine most of the time because they're rocks. At the end of the day, crystals are rocks that have formed from high heat, high pressure, over millions of years, or thousands, or hundreds. It really depends on which crystal you're looking at. The zodiac sign that it's affiliated with is Scorpio. Since Scorpios are very high strung, high energy, high creativity, it helps pinpoint that passion, intensity, and power, and it gives them a good outlet and a good conduit to put that energy into. If you need to cleanse your labradorite, water is a really good base for it. So it can be running, you can leave it in a bowl overnight, or you can leave it by the ocean overnight. So any type of water is a really good cleanser. And then to charge it, you would want to use sun or moon. Sound as well, or selenite, but sun and moon seems to be what a lot of people tend to use. I haven't used labradorite yet, but after researching it, I think I have to go get some. Nikki, are you up for a trip to our favorite metaphysical shop?
Yeah, I actually have a labradorite crystal, and it's on a little sea turtle. If I could find, it's literally laying around here somewhere.
It's
love
that.
My favorite one. I love it so much. Where is it? Oh, and I have a heart-shaped labradorite too.
I don't have one yet, but I have to get one because after looking into it, it's got a lot of qualities that I want in a crystal. But anyway, if you guys use it, let us know in the comments, or if you have any other experiences with it, or if you've gone mining for it. Thank you for coming to our garden. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy our content. Let us know in the comments how you use the crystal we showcased today, and if you would like us to talk about any in the future. See you next time.